Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We have here Armin, the CEO of Node App, who ran a social media agency and consulted over 100 consumer brands. And prior to that, he built 2 7-figure e-commerce brands while in university. And today's topic is developing a go-to-market plan. Over to you, Armin. Thanks so much for joining us.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the intro. Hey, everyone. Great to connect with you on this lovely evening. As Andy mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders at Node. Prior to this, I have some experience in e-commerce and also running an agency. But today we're going to be talking a lot about go-to-market. As well as a side note, I'm also running my side project right now is an online course called Sniffly. Let's get the slides going. So essentially I'm co-founder at Node. I run everything related to business, marketing, fundraising. And then I also have a side project called Sniffly.io, where we're building a smell therapy program for COVID-related smell and taste loss. Today we'll be chatting a little bit about go-to-market strategy. Interestingly enough, we're tackling this right now at Node as we're also actually expanding into the United States with our platform. So go-to-market strategy is something that I hold very closely to my heart. In a nutshell, go-to-market strategy is really going to be the collection of various ideas and hypotheses that you'll have to form a bigger picture, which will essentially be the bigger picture is when you have channel and product market fit. We'll get into that a little bit later. And the most important aspect of finding your go-to-market strategy is actually being able to derive questions from your customers. So looking just outside in and looking at things like industry data and stats will only give you a very limited scope in terms of what kind of levers you really need to pull to get your product to market. So common framework and a really simple one that I want to use to kind of go through this presentation is crawl, walk, run. So the idea is that you're not going to hit the majority of launch events for startups or new products actually suck. They don't get nearly as much attention as they're hyped up to be. And the reason for that is a lack of emphasis on gathering data and also being willing to iterate. So typically, success, as they say, is never a straight line. And you'll find this with your go-to-market strategy. There'll be a majority of things that you try won't work. But it's really a matter of honing in on what levers and what sort of channels drive value for your product and also make your customers happy. So don't expect every plan or tactic you roll out to be a hit. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things we're doing at Node. So crawl, walk, run, what does that mean? Crawl is really the first stage of your go-to-market strategy. So gathering insights and looking at what really is working right now with your proposed users. Second is actually planning around these users. So figuring out what channels, what distribution outlets you're going to use to actually reach these users that you've gathered insights on. And then the last, which we won't talk very much about on this session, is the final stage run, where you actually scale and optimize for things like pricing, customer acquisition costs, and essentially strive to get every net new customer at a lower cost than the previous. Now, quick intro about Node, since we'll break down some parts of my business to go through our go-to-market strategy, and hopefully you could relate some of this back to what you guys are doing at your own startups or side projects. At Node, what we do is we have a 2-sided marketplace that essentially allows brands to get content from micro-influencers, and then we have a private app where micro-influencers can shop for products, but instead of paying for products with cash, they can receive these items by posting on Instagram or TikTok. So what we do is we've created a user-generated content engine, and we have essentially a double-sided marketplace. So we have 2 user segments to always think about. Marketplaces are extremely challenging and risky to start. Mind you, this is my first startup. It's going pretty well, but if I had to do it again, I'm not sure if I would do a marketplace. One thing I will say is that, this is a Typeform that we actually pull from our existing users. So right now we're working on a project to actually expand into the United States. That's really the go-to-market strategy that we're building out. And the most important thing is actually us getting data on whether certain conditions are being met for our users in order for us to be able to expand the US. So for us, we work with over 350 brands based in Canada, and we're trying to learn if these businesses are willing to ship to the United States or have shipping within the States. So we're asking them a series of questions through Typeform. And then we do the same thing with creators. So part of our go-to-market strategy to get creators is understanding what sort of distribution outlets are already working, and also what things they like about Node for us to be able to really hone in on those feature sets when we go and attract new creators in a different geography. And you'll find this is the same for also a new project where first thing you want to do is actually conduct user interviews. And I think there's a different session on that. So I don't want to go too much into interviews and product market fit, but there's a huge amount of work that has to be done prior, getting primary information from your buyers. In the end of the day, everything you build is revolving around a buyer, and you need to be able to properly map out what your buyers' priorities are, their pain points, how willing they are to pay for your product, and then also other outliers that you need to be considerate of when you're targeting these buyers. So for us at Node, we have a few segments that we target to. One are small business owners that are trying to save money and generate content and while spending less time. The reality is that their willingness to pay is pretty low, but they typically show a high enthusiasm for the idea. And that's also something dangerous that we need to be careful of, because we also have a free product and a lot of small businesses love using that app. But again, the conversion rate on that is relatively low. And then we have startup founders, which are usually at a higher stage. They have a completely different set of priorities. Their goal is to test new products and actually find a distribution channel, because more often than not, a startup is in pre-product market fit. And then their pain points also vary from small businesses. So they're very willing to pay, but it's a matter of showing value on the front end through metrics and actual case studies. And then lastly, we have enterprises, which the majority of businesses are actually serving the enterprise, about 60%, which we'll get into in a sec. But enterprise mentality is much different than a startup founder and a small business owner. People that work at enterprises, their goal is to get promotions and to be able to impress their superiors. So they want to see reports and metrics. And their willingness to pay is high, but we put it as a medium because they often have long sales cycles. And when you're selling to an enterprise, it could take anywhere from 12 to 16 months just to get a pilot going. So on that point, aside from being able to understand what our buyer personas are, going back to kind of figuring out what the necessary conditions are for you to have a go-to-market strategy and also product channel fit, you have to hash out certain assumptions that you had. So for us, we had a list of assumptions that our goal was to be able to validate by talking to our users and our customers. And so this is actually a slide that I took from one of our board meetings where we're very upfront about the type of assumptions that we've been able to validate and those that we haven't. And this, again, is really key to the product aspect of our go-to-market strategy. Other important aspect is that we also think about the overall go-to-market funnel as the where you basically place all your different channels and distribution outlets. So the funnel is a really common marketing terminology. And so the way we kind of break it down is awareness at the top. So people actually hearing about your business, maybe knowing what you guys do. The second stage is consideration. So folks that are actually interested or in the market for whatever product that you offer. And finally is conversion, when someone is past awareness and consideration and they're willing to actually convert and purchase your product. And then lastly, we have loyalty and advocacy. So once you have a customer, you want them to be loyal, you want them to be repeated users, and you want their subscriptions to renew. At least that's the case for us. And then last and beyond that is advocacy. So once your customer is loyal, you want to create programs where they can actually share their experience and have other customers join through their word of mouth. So we have bunch of different channels that we use at Node to be able to tap into different levels of the funnel. And one thing you'll notice is like certain channels or certain pieces of marketing collateral will be able to work within different parts of the funnel. So we run Facebook ads for all the way from building awareness to actually creating conversions. It's just that the targeting and the actual creative behind these ads would vary. Things like cold emails, influencers, press, this is a really great way to actually build top of the funnel traffic. But when it comes down to converting, you want to have targeted messaging and also targeted ads and emails to actually be able to close on hot leads. A lot of businesses do like inside selling, like phone calls. We don't do that. But again, it depends on what you're selling. And then lastly, like we use things like customer service, keeping people informed about our product and also giving them perks as a way to build loyalty and also maintain them on our subscription programs. Beyond that, as I mentioned, we have a referral program, and we also regularly ask our customers to write testimonials and reviews. So this is kind of how we take them down the funnel from perspective of our startup at Node. And we've tested a number of acquisition channels as well to actually build distribution. So these are various different channels that we've tested, all the way from running ads, influencer marketing, a referral program, sending voice DMs. So we'd actually send DMs that are pre-recorded, like one-line pitch or like elevator pitches to businesses through DM. We did partnerships with various accelerators to actually provide their startups with a perk. And we also tried something where we would turn our creators into businesses and tap into the entrepreneurs there. Now, in reality, only a few of these channels are actually effective for us. And we're starting to cross out the ones that are not really they're not giving, the right amount of juice for the squeeze. And this is, again, part of developing your go-to-market strategy. So you have to be able to initially gather really firsthand and primary feedback from users, and then understand, and then have a list of hypotheses in terms of how you're going to reach these individuals, and be willing to actually go back and look at the data and really be very honest with yourself in terms of removing kind of the extra fat from some of your go-to-market strategy and the tactics that you're using. Because essentially you do have to be very lean. And to that point, one thing we do at Node is that we have a freemium program. So the way you actually price and present your product is really important. The reason we have a freemium is because at any stage of the funnel, it just basically lubricates it so that businesses are more willing to go to the next. Because if they understand that they can try our product for free, they're more willing to convert. And so it just increases the velocity that folks go through this funnel. What's really interesting is, as I mentioned, like the majority of businesses are selling to enterprise, and the customer segment that you choose to target really varies on how your product is created and also the type of user it's intended for. So at Node, we have a freemium or self-service program. And what we're trying to do is essentially build the Canva of user-generated content. So we want to make content very accessible. So we're definitely not targeting the enterprise. And that's why we use a freemium self-service model. Other businesses have things like free trials where you can actually use the product for a limited period of time. Shopify and YouTube Premium are really great examples of that. But generally, the challenge with that is that you have to actually show results and provide a really solid first experience for your users in order to make them convert. It works really well with SMBs because they're very willing to try a product and also pay for it if they're provided with a trial. The flip side with freemium products is that it can be used by consumers that are looking to start businesses, or for instance, PMs or developers that actually work for larger organizations and have influence in those settings. And then lastly, like there's the classic enterprise model where you do a demo with every business. And generally these are larger contracts because they require so much heavy lifting from a sales associate or your own time. And also these products are generally more sophisticated. So if you're selling, let's say a Salesforce, then you'll want to actually walk your customer through the product in order to make sure that they're actually using it. The worst thing is having zombie users, so users that are signed up for your product but aren't actually using the product. And one is because, I mean, as people building things, you want people to actually enjoy and have passion for what you're building. And that means using it frequently. But the other side of it is that it could really muddy your data once you're trying to, and it could kind of give you the misconception that you have a really popular product, when actually you have people that are joining the app or the solution, but not actually using it frequently. Now, based on where you're targeting within kind of those 3 tiers, it'll also determine your acquisition strategy and where you decide to distribute your product. So here, like, we have a little graph that shows different companies from Salesforce, HubSpot, Dropbox, and Facebook, as well as Xero. And it kind of shows how these different brands or these different companies develop their distribution strategy based on the annual revenue per account, and also the number of customers they would have to have. So Facebook at the bottom, given that they have so many users and they generate so little revenue from each individual users, it's merited that they would have to have a large amount of customers for their business to be profitable and scalable. Hence their use of word of mouth and virality. Whereas Salesforce, where their average revenue per user is much higher, they spend a lot more time with their customers, which is why they would have a smaller overall market and a smaller group of customers to work with. Now, just to recap what we were talking about today, and I want to leave some time open for questions. The idea is, again, like, crawl, walk, run. Go through this in stages instead of having a grand plan. Be very willing to iterate, and also be very reflective on the things that you roll out, and also your customers' feedback. When I break down crawl, walk, run into 5 steps, the first thing is, like I said, do customer interviews, talk to people, define that buyer persona, and then create a distribution or acquisition strategy that actually meets that customer wherever they spend their most time, and whatever channels that they actually consume. And then, like I did when I crossed out some of our channels, reassess those acquisition channels and remove the dead weight. And then lastly, in the scaling phase, you can worry more about kind of optimizing price, developing a payment model to actually make money, and then building out your marketing so that your CAC to LTV, so your customer acquisition cost to the lifetime value, makes sense compared to what you're paying for every new user. Lastly, if you guys want to get in touch, my Twitter is Armin's World. There's actually an error here, so it's not "this is Armin." That's my Instagram. It should be Armin's World, where you guys can find me on Twitter. As well, I'm on LinkedIn. It's Armin Faraji. You guys can obtain my email from the facilitators. I don't want to mention it here publicly just because this video is going to be out on the web, but feel free to get in touch. At Node, we're also hiring right now for customer experience reps. So if you're interested in working in a startup environment and working in a sales role, feel free to get in touch with us. We have job postings on our website, and of course, you could hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn. Happy to open it up for questions now, and I'm not sure how much time we have exactly. I haven't looked at the time yet. Looks like we got about 10 minutes, guys. So if you guys have any questions, you could raise your hand and I'll just call on you, and then you can just unmute yourself and go ahead. Cool, no questions?
Actually, I have one.
Of course.
I guess I'm just gonna chime in. Can you share your experience, a little bit of your experience when you launch your app, like the products, the not app, I mean?
Yeah, I mean, can you be a little bit more specific? Just because I can go on forever in terms of just the overall experience.
So I would say from the process of incubation to actually launching.
Got you. Right. Okay, I understand. So basically, like, the ideation and getting a product up. For me, the main thing was that I was running an agency, and I also ran 2 e-commerce businesses in the past. And so I had some scope in terms of the challenges that e-commerce managers and marketers face firsthand. But really to ensure that what we're building at Node had a viable business model and people were willing to go through this process of working with influencers digitally as opposed to messaging them through Instagram or Facebook. We actually interviewed customers. Like I said, we learned a lot about our users. We figured out what their pain points would be. And then we kind of worked around that with the first iteration of the product. Initially, we were a team of 2. Now we're a team of 7. And so it really just started with myself and my co-founder Mackenzie, who's a product manager. And then we also hired some developers along the way as our product began to scale to be able to pick up on some of the technical debt. That's kind of us in a nutshell. I mean, for us, the other aspect of it was like being able to build relationships with our potential users beforehand. So we got on the phone with people. We went to coffees with influencers. Again, I had a Rolodex of businesses that knew me. So I think like one of the biggest advantages you'll have for whatever product that you launch is your proximity to your users and being able to actually reach these individuals and get really valuable feedback. Doesn't mean you have to be in the same city, but just the most important thing is that they're accessible for you. Other questions? Lynn, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. And guys, feel free to, if you have any questions or if there's a certain problem that you're tackling at your startup, I'd be happy to chime in. So I'm really open to any sort of questions or comments you might have here. Cool. It looks like any more questions, or should we wrap up, y'all?
I have a quick question.
Of course.
What are your advices you could give someone who's like planning on starting an e-commerce business?
E-commerce business. So I've done two very different e-commerce businesses. Had my first one was a women's wedding jewelry, and the way I got into that, actually understanding that there's a huge demand for these products, and also realizing what the margins could be. So for me, it was really just doing like user research to find out that there's an existing market, and then also being able to procure a product that is reasonable in terms of price and the cost to produce. I think that's the first step. And then beyond that, I think it's relatively straightforward to create a Shopify store these days. So really advice is like figure out that people actually want your product. And it doesn't have to mean actually creating or producing the product up front. It can be through surveys, it could be through Reddit, subreddits, it could be through friends and family that you interview. But I think you should understand if there's a real demand for what you're doing, and then create a business model that actually generates revenue for each customer acquired and for every product produced. Does that help, Samaya?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. If you guys want to ask a question, just unmute yourself. Doesn't look like there's too many people in the group anyways.
Hello.
Yep.
Hi, Armin. Thanks for the chat. So I just started a startup a couple weeks ago, or Pathpeer, helps students find and land their dream job by connecting them to professionals for job shadows. So right now we're connecting them for free. So my question is, and I'm trying out different revenue models, but so how would I test different revenue models basically? Because I'm not really sure how to get there.
Right. So are people using your product right now, Dragos?
Yeah, I've already done about like 40 job shadows, and awesome. I get a lot of positive feedback.
Okay. And have you spoken with these people? Like, have you done a structured interview with them after they've used the product?
Yeah. So some of them most of them are not willing to pay the professional. They can't afford $30 or $40 per hour. Some of them are willing to pay, $5, $10. But what I find is that the professionals don't like when I profit from them, even though like there's costs involved. So even if I were to charge students $5 or $10, the professionals, I don't think they would like that.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So I think what you need to do is validate that point, because like again, that's an assumption that I think you should try to validate with the professionals.
So I've done a few, like two or three professionals have said that it feels kind of bad that if I charge the students.
Okay, well, you're gonna have to look at kind of the majority as well. Like, I mean, it depends on kind of how much what kind of sample size you have.
True, that's true.
But Yeah, I think you should look at kind of, and the other thing is maybe those professionals that aren't willing to accept payment, or those shadowers who aren't willing to pay, might not actually be your target segment in terms of persona.
Yeah.
So right away, like it sounds like if you have people that are willing to accept payment and people willing to pay, then maybe those could actually be your power users, and you can try to mimic your go-to-market strategy to find more folks like that. And
So
then,
I mean
yeah, go on.
so what I meant is the students, pay $5, but the professionals still get no money, right? They still volunteer, but the $5 is for me to cover costs and make the service worth it for me.
Yeah, okay, that's even better. So that's even better for you. So I think absolutely, like you should focus on that persona of a user who's willing to pay, and professionals that actually support what you're doing and understand that you guys have overhead you have to cover.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
And then I
Thanks.
think the amounts are like arbitrary in terms of how much you charge per hour, or whether it's hourly or daily, and the amounts. I think those are things that could be tweaked. But I think it's more so like seeing who's willing to pay, and is the format that you have proposed like reasonable for them. And you don't need to build anything to do that, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No worries, man. We're at the last minute. If there's any other questions, guys, shoot them over to me, because I know you guys have another session after. Andy, is that correct?
Yeah, we're just about it for time, but Armin, thank you so much for joining us. I definitely learned a lot as well, and we'll definitely reach out to you for some additional insights as well. So
Awesome.
really
It was
appreciate
fun.
it, and yeah, thanks so much,
All right, guys.
everyone.
Have a good one.